Hello students. In the previous lecture, we started with the third module and we looked at a very interesting concept called memory hierarchy and um, the motivation behind it. So a quick one-line summary of it is where we would like to have a fast, large and low-cost memory, and to achieve that with the available memory technologies like SRAM, DRAM, magnetic disk, etc., the architects were able to build a hierarchy of such memory modules so that the modules which are closer to the processor are small and fast, and the modules which are farther from the processor are large and slow. And if you look at the cost aspect, the modules, the memory levels or modules either way which are closer to the processor are very costly, and as we move farther away they would be cheaper. And uh, with that thought, we also looked at how the memory hierarchy would work. It was basically because of the principle of locality, right? We have temporal locality and spatial locality. With that, let's move on. A few points to note: data is usually inclusive. What do we mean by that? Let's say we have one level of cache, then we have the main memory and we have the secondary memory. What inclusive means, all the data that is there in the cache is also present in the main memory, and all the data which is there in the main memory which is also present in the secondary memory. So unless and until the designers explicitly say that some particular level of memory is exclusive, you can assume that it's an inclusive memory. Okay, basically it is the lower levels of memory are a subset of the higher levels of memory, and typically all the data is stored at the lowest level, which is your hard disk, right? And another point to note is at any given moment we can copy data only from two adjacent levels, meaning we can take some data to the storage, from the storage or the secondary memory to the main memory, place the data there. Only after we copy the data there, we can move it to the cache. And the unit of transfer, the granularity of transfer also varies between the levels. At the caches, we talk about cache block or cache line, a line of data. At the main memory, we talk about pages, and at the secondary memory we are going to look at what's called as sectors, or in general a group of pages at a time. So what it means is we are going to get a group of pages from the secondary memory to the main memory, and if there is one more level of main memory, for example, between those two levels the granularity of access would be one page, and between the main memory and the cache it is only one cache line. Okay, so the unit of transfer go increases as we go from the top layers of memory to the bottom layers of memory, basically to exploit the spatial locality. What does spatial locality say is, if you access a location or the data in some particular location, then spatial locality says that the adjacent locations will also be most likely be used. So in order to you exploit this point, instead of getting only that location, we take with us a group of locations and store it in the uh, level above. A few new terms or terminology that we are going to use in this module. Hit is an event when we have requested a data in some particular memory level and it is actually present there. Miss is the data we requested is not present. Hit rate or hit ratio is the total number of hits upon the total number of accesses we made to that particular level. Let's say we went to the main memory 100 times and 80 times we found the data in it. 20 times we did not find the data. So the hit rate would be 80 upon 100, and miss rate is the ones which have missed in that particular level. So in our example, it is 20 upon 100, or it can also be said as 1 minus hit rate. Hit time is the time to access that level, a level of memory. It will include the time we take to determine whether a request is hit or miss. Miss penalty, on the other hand, is the time to fetch a block of data from the lower level. What it includes is time to access the data in the lower level. Let's say we have one level of cache, one level of memory and a main memory, and the third level is secondary memory. So let's say we looked up into the cache for some particular address and it is a miss. So we send the data to the main memory. So miss penalty starts from there. So uh, the time we take to figure out whether data is there in the main memory or not, and if it is there, to send it to the cache back, further write it in the upper into the cache, and in parallel, or it can also happen in a sequence, but this is a design choice. So as we write that piece of data from the main memory to the cache, we can also directly send it to the processor. So this you can imagine to be effectively the time seen by the processor on a miss. So the processor is typically interacting with the cache only. Now we have the notion of miss penalty only when we have miss in the cache. So the processor is waiting on this data. So the longer the miss penalty, the higher the number of stalls will be there at the pipeline. We always expect the highest possible hit rate at the top levels, so that even though the lower levels are there which are slower, their latency will not be seen by the processor. Continuing, what we have is memory access time. It is the time lapse between initiation of an operation and its completion. So it might sound too technical, but it's simply the time we wait from the moment we give the data to some particular level and that level replies us with the data. And memory cycle time is the minimum time delay between initiation of two successive or consecutive memory operations. What it means is, if we have requested the cache for data, let's say in cycle number 10, and the next request can be sent to the cache only, let's say in cycle number 15, for example, because the cache is busy or whatever. So memory cycle time is 15 minus 10, which is 5 cycles. And memory access time would be, let's say for the request we sent in cycle number 10, the cache has replied us with data in cycle number 13. So it would be 13 minus 10, which is 3 cycles. Another new term is volatility. We have volatile memories and non-volatile memories. Volatile memories are those which can retain their state or store the data as long as power is supplied to them. So examples are the registers, static RAM, and dynamic RAM. Non-volatile memory, also called NVM in short, is the other ones which can store the data even if the power is turned off. So here the examples are magnetic disks, flash-based SSDs, or STT-MRAM or PCM. In fact, the easiest example that I can give you is your micro SD cards, right? So they're also flash-based anyways. But even though when you remove them from your cell phone or your camera, and they retain their status. They are non-volatile memories. Now coming to the term random access memory, I've used it quite a bit, saying that static RAM, dynamic RAM, etc. So random access memory is that memory which will take same time for any request for any location in it. So let's say our memory has 1,000 locations. To access location number 0 and to access the last location, let's say 999, if the memory takes same time, it's called random access memory. So as the name says, SRAM and DRAM are indeed random access memories, and registers are also random access, because to access register 0 or let's say register 64, it would take same time for us. And the ones which are not random access are hard disks and HDDs and SSDs. There are few other types of memory which allow us only to read from them. It means that the manufacturer will write some data in it, and thereafter either the user or anybody, even when we are testing for example, we can only read from that data. That's called read only memory. There are variants of read-only memories over the years. We started off with the simple read-only memory, then we have a programmable read-only memory, PROM. What it means is instead of the manufacturer writing the data to it, the end user will write some data to it once and read it after that. Then electrically programmable read-only memory. What it says is the earlier PROM used to require a lot of hardware to do the writing to the ROM, right? But electrically programmable read-only memory can easily write the data to the ROM. That's the very first time. There's only once that's we are going to do it. So, but that is made easy with EPROM. Electrically erasable programmable read-only memory is a step further, where we can write not once but a few selected number of times, let's say 5 times or 10 times to that ROM. So of course it defeats the purpose, or if it's an abuse of the name ROM, but it's provided to give enough flexibility to the end user. So ROMs will never have the capability to handle writes that a typical memories like registers or SRAM or hard disk have. ROM is a specialized memory. It has capability to handle only few set of writes, but you can read any number of times. Okay, so typically you will find ROMs in your embedded systems kind of setup, or for example your washing machine or uh, your vacuum cleaner, where the entire programming is done once and it's burnt into the chip and you are going to use it multiple times. Moving on, in this course we are primarily focusing on the regular memories, not ROM memories, and we will start with the cache memory. Like I already mentioned, it is based on static RAM technology. So it, as typical SRAM cell is made up of 6 transistors. It's called 6T cell. T stands for transistor, and it looks something like this. So if you remember, I've already mentioned in the beginning of module 2 that there are NMOS and PMOS transistors. NMOS will be on when the gate is supplied with high voltage. PMOS will be on when the gate is supplied with low voltage. So, and the way they are represented are here is NMOS, and if you have a bubble in front of the gate, then it's called a PMOS. And they are connected in some way that works as SRAM. So, for simplicity, here is an abstraction. You can imagine that these 4 transistors are acting as 2 inverters, and the output of one is connected as input to the other inverter, and the output of second inverter is connected to the input of the first inverter. And we have two other transistors M6 and M5 here, which are called access transistors, right? And we have two vertical lines which are bit line and bit line bar, and we have one horizontal connection which is word line. Okay, this whole arrangement together is called one SRAM cell, and it has capability of storing one bit of information. It can store either a 0 or either a 1 that we read by looking at the BL, the bit line. But anyways, so this course is not going to dive into how the SRAM cell works. We just assume that yes, we have an SRAM cell which has capability of storing either a bit uh, 1 or bit 0. So why is it called static? Is we don't need to refresh the cell to help it retain the data. So what do you mean by refresh? We are going to look at that in the main memory when we are talking about dynamic RAM. Okay, and SRAM is volatile in nature. What it means is, let's say in case we have removed the voltage VDD and we have disconnected the ground, for example, then the cell will no longer retain the state. Means it will no longer hold bit 1 or bit 0. Typically, multiple levels of cache are common. It means that all of them are more or less built on SRAM technology only, and internal workings of all the cache memory levels is same. So let's say we have the core where we have our pipeline, and the requests from the pipeline come to the first level of cache, also called L1 cache. The core will give L1 cache an address, and it expects response of data, right? Let's say if the particular address is a miss in L1 cache, it will be forwarded to L2 cache, and L2 cache will respond to L1 cache with that piece of data, and then the L1 cache further forwards it to the core. But let's say L2 also did not find that particular piece of data, means it's a miss in L2 also, then it forwards the address to L3. L3, if it is a hit, will forward the data to L2. L2 will forward to L1, and L1 will forward to core. And let's say if it is a miss in L3 also, then L3 forwards the data to the main memory, and main memory responds us to the data with the data, and so on and so forth. Now, if we look at the granularity, the main memory will respond to L3 cache with a block of data. L3 will respond to L2 with a block of data. L2 will respond to L1 with a block of data, but L1 responds to the core with only a word of data. As you know, the core will work only at word granularity, or it will perform additions or subtractions or whatever at word granularity. Hardly, if we take the risk, we can perform double words or uh, quad words, but nothing more than that. So the L1 will always respond in terms of words of data, but the other levels have blocks of data in it. Now the question is, why are we taking a block of data when the processor has requested or the core has requested for only one word? So this is with an intention that the neighboring words will also be used in the near future. So to exploit the spatial locality. Now let's dive further into one level of cache. So the same thing you can replicate in other levels of cache also. At a very high level, you can imagine that cache is basically a collection of blocks. Cache block or cache line is a set of words, and typically the word size is 4 bytes or 8 bytes. And typical cache block sizes are 32 bytes or 64 bytes. Now, if somebody asks you what is the size of the cache, what we do is we if we have the total number of blocks that are there in the cache, we multiply it with the size of one block. So if we have a question like the cache is of size 32 kilobytes and the block size is 64 bytes, for example, then the number of blocks would be 32 kilobyte upon 64 bytes, which is 512. But let's say if the cache block size is 32 bytes, then there will be 1024 blocks. Or the question may be other way around. We are given the number of blocks and the block size. From that, we can calculate the total cache size. So let's say we have a cache with capacity of 8 blocks and each block is of size 16 bytes. So we have block 0, block 1, so on and so forth, block 6 and block 7. So these are our 8 blocks of data. And let's say our word size is 4 bytes. It means that in a cache block of 16 bytes, there will be 4 words per block. So block 0 has word 0, word 1, word 2 and word 3. Now, as I already said, each word is also made up of 4 bytes. So you can imagine that there is 4 byte of data in word 0, which is byte 0, byte 1, byte 2, byte 3. Okay. Now, to identify this particular block, right, we also store the address of this block in the cache. We will not store the complete address, but rather we will store the address of its first byte. Here word 0, byte 0. So on and so forth. So we keep an address of each block with us. So for example, here the address of the second block is 3BEF. So on and so forth. And the address of, let's say, block 6 is 1234 and block 7 is 5050H. So all these are hexadecimal values. So the address 1000H here is the address of the very first byte of this particular word and this particular block. Now, if you ask, how will I identify the other words or other bytes of data in this block? It's more or less simple. We have the starting address. We know the block size. So in this case, we have 16 bytes here. So this particular location has data from addresses 1000 to 1000F. So whenever a request comes, let's say 2000A, address 1000A, what we do is we remove the LSB part first to get the value 1000, and using 1000 we get the entire block, and from that block we are now going to use the value A, right, which is called byte offset, to get that particular byte of data. So we are going to look at the details a little more. Okay, so but in for now, just assume that the address of first byte of the cache block is available with us and it's placed adjacent to that block itself. So whatever data is there in the cache, I've already mentioned that is inclusive of the main memory. It means that we are going to take a copy from the main memory and put it in the cache. We are not going to do a cut paste kind of thing. It is copy and paste just to correlate. Okay, so all the data that is there in the cache, their main master copy is always there in the main memory. So these copies that we place in the cache are only to speed up the processor speed. We don't want the processor to wait on the main memory all the time, so we have introduced the cache. So the array which stores the data of all the blocks is called data array, and the other part where we store the addresses or part of addresses is called tag array. Now if we look at the number of SRAM cells that this particular cache has, so each word has 4 bytes It means that there are 32 bits of data, and for each bit we need one SRAM cell. So each word requires 32 SRAM cells, and each block requires 128 SRAM cells. And this entire cache of 8 blocks of 16 bytes overall each, has 1024 SRAM cells. It means that this data array has 1024 SRAM cells. And what about the tag array? Obviously, we need to store some addresses, and for each bit of that particular address, we need one SRAM cell. And the size of this tag array depends on some other design features that we are going to see. A quick point here: when we say the cache is of size 32 kilobytes, for example, here in this example, we say that 32 kilobytes cache is there, made up of 512 blocks of each 64 bytes. This 32 kilobytes is the size of data array. We don't generally include tag array in our cache size calculations. Okay, so tag array is an overhead for us to maintain for proper working of cache, but it's not included as part of the term cache size. Okay, now let's look at how the cache works. Upon receiving an address from the processor, the control circuitry in the cache, which is called as cache controller, will uh, take some part of its address bits and compare those with the tag, uh, with the entry in the tag array, right? If there is a match, then it's called a cache hit. What the cache controller does is it will then access the data array and take that particular byte or group of bytes, or you can say that particular word, and forward it to the processor. But if it is a cache miss, then the cache controller will forward this address to the next level of cache. Before it sends that, it keeps a copy of that address here, so that when the next level of cache replies, it will know for which particular data it has got a reply for. To understand the cache working, we will try to answer 4 questions. Where can I place a block of data? It's called block placement. How can I identify the block of data? It's called block identification. And the third question is, which block do we need to replace upon a miss? It's called block replacement. And the fourth question is, what happens on a write? It will come under write strategy. So we are going to look at each of these questions one at a time. We are going to start with block placement here. So where can I place a block of data? There are 3 possible choices. The very first one is I can place the block anywhere in the cache. If that is the design, then we call the cache as fully associative cache. The other way is I'll give only one and only in that location we can place this block of data. It's called direct mapped cache. And the third possibility is midway between the fully associative cache and direct mapped cache, which says that okay, I will not give one place, but few possible options for you to place the block of data. It's called set associative mapping. If there are n possible places where you can place the data, it's called n-way set associative. Now it's important to understand that we will use only one of these n places to store this block of data, not all the n places. Okay. So let's try to understand using a example. Let's say we have a main memory with 16 blocks 0, 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth till 32. So we have 32 blocks, and the block numbers are B0 through B31. Okay, these are our addresses for the blocks. Now let's say uh, we have the three design choices. The one is fully associative, and second one is direct map, and the third is set associative cache. And here I have considered a two-way set associative cache. If you notice, all the caches have size of 8 blocks. All the size, friends, all the three are same. In fully associative cache, for example, let's say we have a request from the processor for some data in block number 13. So that block is there in the main memory. So we get it, and if we can write this block number 13 in any of these 8 positions, it's called a fully associative cache. So we can write it either as block 7 or block 6, 5, 4, so on and so forth, right? So if block 13 can be mapped to any location in the cache, it's called fully associative cache. But if it is mapped only to one location, it is called direct map cache. Now, how will we identify which location it has been mapped? What we do is we take the block address, divide it with the number of uh, possible locations that we have here. It is 8 possible locations. So 13 8, and we take the remainder, which is 5, and that's where we are going to place it. So there is another term for it, which is called set. So here this particular block has 8 sets, and this particular cache has 8 sets, and the same uh, capacity cache but with two-way set associative has 4 sets of 2 blocks each. I'll not confuse you further. I'm going to touch upon this again in the next class. But for now, to identify which set this particular block belongs to, we divide the address, requested address, with the total number of sets. Here it is 8, and we get the remainder as 5. So that's where the block number 13 will go to. But in fully associative cache, whichever place is free, that's where we are going to put it. Now, like I said, two-way set associative cache is a middle ground between full associative and direct map. Here we have considered two-way set associative cache, and the number of sets are 4, and the total cache capacity is 8 blocks. So this block number 13 will be placed in which set? How do we identify? Again, the same process, divide 13 by the number of sets, here 4. So the remainder is 1. It means that uh, this is set 0, set 1, set 2, set 3, and block number 13 can be placed in either of these two locations within set 1. That's why it's called two-way set associative cache, because there are two possible locations where a block can fit in. Now, if it is a four-way set associative cache, then within that particular set, we can place in any of those 4 locations. Now, fully associative cache is where the number of locations in a set is same as the cache size. That's why we say that in a fully associative cache, the number of sets is 1. And in direct mapped cache, the number of sets is equal to number of blocks. And in set associative cache, the number of sets is equal to total number of blocks upon the associativity. Okay. With that, I will pause this lecture. We are going to continue answering other questions, and by the end of the 4th question, we will have a complete picture of how the cache would work. With that, I'll pause this lecture. Thank you.